It was during a Bible study here at this church. One of you, I think I recall who it was, but I don't remember for sure. We were talking about times when we had been touched by God or seen God in a powerful way, a way that kind of stunned us, that took the breath from us, that we weren't really sure what had happened, couldn't fully explain it. Miraculous, supernatural, or just an encounter with God that was outside of the norm. And one of you shared, having been driving through, it was either the plains or the Midwest, when the winds were kicking up, and suddenly you found yourself staring at a cyclone, at a tornado. And this tornado caught up you and your car, and the next thing you knew, after closing your eyes thinking, I'm going to probably die in this moment, and saying a prayer, oh God, that you woke up or opened your eyes laying in a field without a scratch, wondering, how did I get out of the car, its doors, my seatbelt, the car a great distance away, destroyed, and thinking, am I really here? What just happened? Did you ever wonder, if you try to put yourself in the shoes of James, John, and Peter? They're trekking up the mountain with Jesus. Lots of mountaintop experiences in the Bible. And Jesus had just gotten done telling the disciples, all of them, listen, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to take up your cross. You're going to have to be willing to risk even your life itself. And before we gloss over this, take up your cross, I mean, consider this. For a first century Jewish man or woman hearing that, Jesus might as well have been saying, take up your electric chair. Be willing to be waterboarded. I mean, we wear crosses as jewelry and bracelets and, little what would Jesus do things. And the cross is a powerful symbol of our faith. To them, it was terrifying. It was shocking. And Jesus says, where I'm going is going to have a high level of risk, require a great deal of courage. It's going to cost you something. Are you willing to follow me there? And he said to them, I tell you truly, not all of you who are gathered here, some of you will see the Son of Man come into his full glory before you taste death. So that's the backdrop when it says 6 days later. 6 days later, they're going up the mountain with Jesus, and suddenly it's like a laser light show. Jesus' face is shining, it's bright like the sun, his clothes are dazzling. The Greek is metamorphized, he undergoes a metamorphosis, a transfiguration, a changing from one thing to the next. And I wonder if those guys said, this is it, this is what he was talking about. I mean, these three guys were fishermen, right? Their first encounter with Jesus was, hey, let's go fishing. Okay. Next thing they know, they hear him teaching in ways they've never heard any rabbi they've grown up with teach. They hear him have a prophetic voice in challenging people with a discomforting truth that is right on the money, like nobody they've ever heard. They see blind men see and lame men walk, and they say, this guy is a miracle worker, a healer. But they've never seen anything like what happens on this mountain. Now, this is something altogether different. And it makes me wonder, how about you? Have you ever had an experience with God that was disquieting, that made you wonder, is this real? Am I going crazy? What just happened? Because it defies all rational explanation, all scientific method. I had a professor of homiletics, Will Willimon, fantastic preacher. Not such a great teacher, but a great preacher. And I remember him talking about the Transfiguration one Sunday at Duke Chapel. Most of these folks are professors or grad students, a pretty highly educated congregation. And he said, I know, you're twitching in your seats. You're uncomfortable. You think, these guys, what did they really experience? Was the air just thinner up there? Or are they imagining things? Because this just, Jesus glowing just like a Christmas tree, just sounds kind of unusual. Maybe they worked it out. Maybe it's just the gospel writer saying, here's Elijah, the greatest of all the prophets. Here's Moses, the greatest of the law. Maybe they're just Matthew's way of saying Jesus is better and greater and embodies both those guys more powerfully, right? But Willimon said, well, what if in all our modernity and all our scoffing at the miraculous, or, God can only be defined by how we can explain it. Well, what if something else happened on that mountaintop? He goes on to talk about Morton Kelsey, who was an Episcopal priest and also psychologist who did a series of interviews with almost 1,000 Roman Catholic laity for the Catholic Church talking about spiritual mysticism. And he asked each of these participants, have you ever had an experience with God that was life-changing? That you look back and you wonder what exactly happened, but you look back on it and you can't fully explain it, but it was something mystical. And he found that 1.3, every lay person he talked to had 1.3. I don't know how he got the 0.3, but I guess some didn't have some, but maybe several had many experiences that were life-changing with God, transformative. But then the thing that shocked Kelsey was almost to a person, 90% of the participants followed up unsolicited, but I've never told a soul. And he was taken aback. He said, why not? Did you talk to the sisters in the parish or to your priest? Why didn't you share this? And they said, well, they'd think I was crazy. We have an aversion to these kind of holiness moments where heaven and earth meet, and it seems inexplicable. Some of you are familiar with Frederick Buechner. Great writer, and he writes about a time when he and his wife were visiting the widow of his best friend Theodore, who had died. Just several weeks later, after the memorial service, they went to be with Betsy, his wife, and just to get her to help put one foot in front of her, just to be with her as she's trying to work through her grief. And they spent the better part of the day with her. And he said, my wife and I went home. It was late in the evening, and we got ready for bed, went to sleep. And about 2:30 in the morning, I was startled awake. There was something in the house. I heard a noise. And he said, it wasn't something, it was someone. And then the hairs on the back of my neck started to stand up because that someone was in the room, my bedroom. And as I'm trying to calm my heartbeat down, I look over the covers, and I sat up in bed, and there at the end of my bedpost is Teddy. And I said, Teddy, is that you? And he said, my friend was soft-spoken, but he always had this kind of wry smile that he'd get, this kind of lopsided grin. And he said, Teddy just gave me that lopsided grin. He reached down to the carpet, and he picked up a tuft of wool. And he just showed it to me. He grinned, and he let it drop. And I watched that wool drop past the bedpost. I looked up, and Teddy was gone. And he said, I sat there for the better part of an hour, thinking, did that just happen? Am I overly tired? What the heck is going on? In the morning, he said, I talked to my wife about it. I said, he was standing right here, middle of the night. And I looked down at the carpet, and there was this tuft of wool. My wife said, I just vacuumed that. I don't think that was there the other day, but I don't know. Mountaintop experiences. Sometimes maybe that we can't articulate or put into words. Peter, James, and John see Moses and Elijah there. Again, the greatest of the prophets, the giver of the law. One might wonder how they knew it was Moses. I mean, did Elijah have the chariot of fire parked over on the side there? But all of a sudden, Peter says, Lord, it's good that we're here. And I could build 3 booths, a very Jewish thing to do. Like Abraham gets a covenant from God, the messengers from God at Mamre, and he builds an altar to God. Jacob, that stairway to heaven experience, stacked stone, built an altar to commemorate, to remember that at this place something special happened. Peter wants to capture this moment in the same kind of way. I could build booths. One for you, Lord, one for Elijah, one for Moses, and we could keep this holy space. We'd come back up here and visit it. We can put it on the trophy shelf of faith. But Jesus isn't interested in that kind of thing. Which makes me wonder, as we think about being church, and all the ways we get filled up in worship or together, it's not so much about holding on to that moment together here, but it's about how are we being prepared then, filled up to go out into the world, into the valleys, into the day-to-day mess, into the places where people are overwhelmed or in despair. And that's the thing that stands out to me more than anything about the text of the Transfiguration. And unfortunately, most of the time when it's in the lectionary, it's just this moment with Peter, James, and John on the mountain, and Jesus walking down and telling them not to tell anybody until he comes back from the dead. It doesn't link the valley to the mountaintop. But something's really lost there, because here are these 3 guys that have had a moment with God like nothing else they've experienced in their life. What about the other 9? Go down with me for a minute to the bottom of the mountain. These guys have a distraught father coming to them. My kid, I don't know what's going on. He has these seizures. He's trying to inflict pain on himself. He throws himself. He burns himself. Tried to drown himself. Something demonic. I mean, we might not label it demons, but how many of us have family members, loved ones, who have been in and out of rehab, in and out of jail, who are struggling mightily with a loss or broken relationship of a marriage, and they are a wreck, who are battling depression, and they are not the person we know. This struggle is taking everything out of them. Here is this desperate dad. I asked your disciples to do something to heal him, and they couldn't do it. I wonder how many of us at the base of the mountain, the everyday grind of discipleship, especially now, when you see one more ugly post on Facebook, one more unkind thing being said to somebody else in the supermarket between complete strangers, you think, what has happened to civility or any kind of dignity or value of our neighbors? You see Antarctica, 65 degrees, and yet more subsidies to coal and oil. And you think, what are we doing? Do you ever feel just beat up, powerless? Here are these guys coming down from the mountain. Man, that was great. I think of, that scene with Flounder and Animal House. This is going to be great. Let's build some booths. Yes. We want to stay up here all day. And the other 9, oh, man. This is tough stuff. And we feel like we're up against the wall day in and day out, trying to live out discipleship in our everyday lives. And Jesus comes down, and it's not really a great pep talk, is it? You perverse and little faith generation. How long I got to put up with you guys? Jeez. We're doing our best. Mark tells it a little bit differently. It's one of my favorite passages in all the Bible. In it, the dad says, Lord, if you can do something for my son, please help me. And Mark says, Jesus says, if you have little faith, talking to the dad, of course, if you have enough faith, of course I can do something. And the man says one of the most honest truths of the Bible. Lord, I believe you have the power to heal my son. But at the same time, I've got my doubts. Help me in my disbelief. Because in the real world, there are times when I feel close to you, and there are times when I wonder if you're even around at all, if I'm honest. My faith is not a level playing field where it's always like this. No, I have moments like this, and then I have moments when I'm crashing and burning, and I'm barely holding on. And maybe that's the strength of church. Because none of us journeys alone. And because, honestly, there's moments when we can't form the words for our prayers. We need our brothers or sisters to hold us and pray for us. Back to Williman as he's finishing that powerful sermon on transfiguration, much more eloquently than I could ever do. He says, in my very first church, there was a woman, her and her husband had a child who was born with a chronic and terminal illness, requiring a lot of extra care, some home health care, and a lot of their energy. She went to working part-time, and 16 months in, with all the energy and challenges health-wise that this boy had, Austin, her husband one day at breakfast said, I can't do this anymore, and walked out on them both. Church helped her, rallied around her, and they were working as she was trying to raise this young man in and out of the hospital and surgeries. And she recalled as Williman recalled, he, about 16 years later, did the young man's funeral. He died at 18. And as they were planning the memorial service, his mother and Williman, he said, you must be one of the strongest women I've ever seen. The kind of faith you've needed for this journey, and you've done it alone. She said, alone. She said, you know, when Austin was 7 years old, his dad had long since gone. Well-intentioned people at church kind of had started to fade away. It was a lot of work for everyone. And it was just a bad morning. It was driving me crazy. And I remember sitting there at the table, and I lost my temper, and I said, Austin, you sit there in that chair, you wait for the garbage man, because that was a highlight of his day on Fridays, to see the garbage man and to see the garbage truck load. She said, you sit right there in that chair, you be quiet, you wait for the garbage man, and Mommy's going to be back in a minute. She said, I walked down the hall, and I broke down in tears, and I said, God, why are you doing this to me? I can't do this anymore. And she was ashamed of herself for feeling that way about her son. But it was taking its toll. And she said, where are you, Lord? And she said, I heard the garbage truck outside. I heard a little giggle. And in that moment, I looked down the hallway. And the sun, for whatever reason, as I looked at Austin sitting in his chair, the sun came in a way that just kind of lit up his face, his smile. And he turned and looked at me and smiled at me and giggled, pointing at a garbage truck. And she said, Pastor, it was like my boy was an angel at that moment. And I saw him in a way I had never seen him. Of course, I love my son. But at that moment, when I was I just thought I was going to break to pieces. It's as if God was saying, there, there. Pastor, I've never been alone. I just don't think I knew it until that moment. So I wonder today, as you've come through these doors or as you're watching online, where are you? Mountaintop? Journey in between? Or down in that valley? God's in them all. Sometimes it's just a matter of seeing it in a way we haven't seen it before. And in my own experiences, I expect the burning bushes. I pray for the car moments, the teddy at the end of the bed. But 90% of the time, God shows up at a cup of coffee across the table from me in a kitchen or downstairs, the number of pads, in ways I never could have imagined. In people. God is still speaking. We say it all the time. What is God saying to you? Amen.